"Charlotte, could you wash the dishes? Mom and I will have some wine." That's what my daughter-in-law said, right in front of everyone. Her mother smiled, my son said nothing, and for a moment I just stood there. I wasn't a guest, I wasn't family. I was a servant in my own child's home. I felt my face burn, but I stayed quiet. I washed my hands, picked up my coat, and walked out. No one even noticed I was gone. I'd spent my whole life working, raising my son alone, thinking family meant love. But that night, I learned it can also mean humiliation. I never told them why I left. I just knew I couldn't sit at a table where I was treated like furniture. If you've ever been made to feel small by the people you love, stay with me. Because this story is for us. The sound of the old piano fills the room again, uneven, hesitant, like it's trying to remember a song it once knew by heart. The notes slip through the cracks of the window, carried by the winter wind. Outside, fog hangs over Union Lake, thick and gray, swallowing the outlines of the boats. I sit there, my hands resting on the yellowed keys, staring at nothing. It's been 2 winters since Harold passed. I still can't bring myself to play the pieces he loved. The piano's out of tune, and so am I. The kettle begins to whistle. I pour hot water into my chipped teapot, watch the steam rise, and add a small spoon of honey. I set the cup beside me and glance at the photograph on the mantel. Harold, smiling in his worn sweater, eyes full of mischief. I touch the frame lightly. "You'd tell me to stop moping and get on with it, wouldn't you?" I whisper. Bills sit on the table, gas, electricity, insurance, each one stamped in red. I fold them neatly, place them under a paperweight, and turn my head toward the phone when it rings. "Mom?" The voice is warm, hurried. "Ethan, my only son. Hey, we've been talking, and Sophie really wants you to come for Christmas. She misses you." For a second, I don't breathe. Sophie, my granddaughter. It's been almost a year since I last saw her. "Are you sure?" I ask softly. You know I don't want to intrude. "Mom," Ethan cuts in, his tone gentle but firm. "It's Christmas. You belong with us." I feel something flicker inside me, a small spark I thought had gone out long ago. I look around this quiet house, its faded wallpaper, the stillness that fills every corner. "All right," I say finally, "I'll come." When the call ends, I stand there for a moment, the silence pressing in. Then I move, faster than I have in months. I pull the old suitcase from under the bed, brush off the dust. Inside go the essentials. 2 warm sweaters, 1 gray coat, the wool scarf Harold gave me on our last Christmas together. On the kitchen counter, a tin of almond cookies waits, baked just yesterday. Sophie loves them. I tuck them carefully between layers of clothes. Then I pause, looking at the reflection in the mirror by the hallway. A woman in her mid-60s stares back. The hair has gone silver, the face marked by time. But the eyes still carry a light, faint but stubborn. "You still have a few good chapters left," I murmur to myself. Outside, the fog thickens. I turn off the lights, double-check the locks, and take one last look at the living room, the piano, the picture, the half-empty cup of tea. Everything looks the same, but somehow it all feels different. When I close the door behind me, the wind catches it for a second, as if the house doesn't want to let me go. The suitcase wheels creak against the wooden porch. The street lamp flickers, dim and lonely. I glance back once, just once. The house stands still, wrapped in mist. For years it's been my shelter, my comfort, and my cage. As I lock the gate, a thought passes through my mind. Quiet but clear. Maybe this Christmas will be the start of something new. The camera would pull back now. From the porch to the street. From the street to the wide frame of Union Lake disappearing under fog. A small figure moving slowly through the mist, her coat trailing, suitcase rolling behind her. She doesn't know yet that this trip, this one small decision, will change everything. That night, as I turned the key and stepped into the fog, I didn't realize I wasn't just leaving my house. I was walking straight into a storm that had been waiting for years. San Francisco on Christmas Eve is all light and glass, the kind of beauty that doesn't warm you, only dazzles you. Through the car window, the neon signs blur into ribbons of color. I hold my suitcase close, feeling both excited and uneasy. Ethan meets me in the lobby. He looks older than I remember, the same tired smile, the same eyes that never rest. "Mom," he says softly, taking my bag. "It's good to have you here." The elevator hums up 20 floors, stopping with a quiet chime. The door opens to their apartment, bright, sleek, modern. A huge Christmas tree sparkles near the window. Everything looks perfect, but it smells of something unfamiliar, sharp and cold, like air freshener and new paint. Clara, you made it. Sophie rushes toward me, her voice honeyed. She's holding a glass of red wine, her nails perfectly manicured. She kisses my cheek lightly, the way people do for cameras. It must have been such a long trip. Sit down. Let me pour you a drink. Her tone is sweet, but her eyes never soften. Ethan hovers behind her, loosening his tie. The table is already set, plates gleaming, food perfectly arranged. You shouldn't have cooked so much, I say. This looks like a feast. Sophie laughs, a little too brightly. It's Christmas, Clara. We have to do it properly. She gestures toward the seat at the far end of the table, the one slightly away from them. I sit. The lights shimmer on the polished silverware. Sophie keeps the conversation going, her words sliding between politeness and quiet jabs. Oh, you're still wearing that coat. I remember it from last year. Vintage now, right? I smile faintly. Yes, it's warm. Seattle must get lonely when it's just you. I look down at my plate. Sometimes, I admit. She smiles, the kind that looks kind but lands sharp. Well, you're always welcome here. Ethan clears his throat, tries to steer the talk toward safer ground. Work, the weather, how busy things have been. But even then, the warmth feels practiced, like a play they've rehearsed too many times. The food is delicious, but it tastes like nothing. Every word feels measured, every gesture staged. I try to join in, to make small talk, but my voice feels thin against their laughter. After dessert, I begin stacking the plates. No, Mom, sit, Ethan says, but before he finishes, Sophie's voice cuts in. Light, casual, but with the softness of a command. It's okay, Ethan. Mom can help me with the dishes. I'll pour us another glass of wine. My hands freeze. She turns to her mother, who's on video call, smiling from Florida, and raises her glass. To family, she says. To family, I whisper, but it barely leaves my lips. The sound of running water fills the kitchen. The sink is deep and cold. My reflection shivers on the steel faucet as I wash each plate one by one. Behind me, laughter rises. Light, effortless. Ethan says something I can't catch. Sophie giggles, her voice blending with the clink of glasses. They sound happy, and I feel unnecessary. The water runs too long. My fingers wrinkle, red from the soap. I pause for a moment, staring at my reflection in the kitchen window, blurred by steam, haloed by the city lights outside. A stranger stares back. Once, I used to be the center of someone's world, the woman who made every meal, who wiped every tear, who held everything together. Now I'm just an extra, standing quietly off stage. From the living room, Sophie calls out, Clara, could you rinse the pan too? I always burn the edges. Her voice is light, almost apologetic, but something inside me cracks. I glance toward the living room. Ethan is scrolling through his phone. Sophie is laughing into her wine glass. Neither looks up. Sure, I say, but my voice doesn't sound like mine anymore. The faucet hisses louder, drowning the laughter. I rinse the last plate, dry my hands slowly, and glance up at the small mirror hanging near the kitchen shelf. In it, I see my hands, trembling, thin, soap-streaked, and my face behind them, pale under the kitchen light. The woman in the reflection looks tired, but not weak, just unseen. I turn off the tap. The water drips once, twice, then silence. In that small square of glass, I saw it clearly, the truth I had tried to ignore. I no longer belonged in that house. The next morning, I woke up to the clatter of dishes and the scent of perfume. Sophie was rushing between the kitchen and the dining room, heels clicking sharply against the floor. They'll be here any minute, she said without looking at me. They? I asked. Mom and Dad, she answered, smoothing her hair in the mirror. They're spending Christmas with us this year. My chest tightened a little. I hadn't known. When the doorbell rang, Sophie straightened her dress, plastered on a bright smile, and opened the door. Diane entered first, tall, polished, every movement rehearsed. Her voice carried the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Robert followed behind, quiet, polite, and half-absent, scrolling through his phone. Clara, Diane said, stretching my name like it was an afterthought. I've heard so much about you. I smiled. And I about you. She gave a small laugh, sharp, clipped. I imagine so. From the first moment, the air changed. Diane moved through the apartment as if it belonged to her, commenting on the curtains, the wine, even the dishes. Her perfume lingered like smoke. At lunch, she set her napkin down with precision. "So, Clara," she began, tone casual but eyes alert, "I heard you still teach piano lessons?" I nodded. "A few students, mostly kids from the neighborhood." Her eyebrows lifted, the faintest smile curling on her lips. "How lovely. Though, honestly, with technology now, who still wants to learn piano?" The words landed like small cuts, deliberate, polite, impossible to call out. Sophie laughed quickly. "Oh, Mom, you'd be surprised. Some people still like the old ways." "Yes, nostalgia's charming," Diane replied, taking a slow sip of wine. "But it doesn't pay the bills." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Robert looked up long enough to add, "Teaching's a nice hobby, though." His tone was flat, as if discussing the weather. I smiled faintly, stirring my soup. Silence was the only shield that still worked. Diane leaned back, eyes glancing over the table, the simple plates I had helped set, the small bouquet I had brought from the market. "You know," she said, "Robert and I were just talking about downsizing. Our Florida place is getting a bit much to maintain. You should consider that too. Big houses are such a burden when you're alone." The word alone hung in the air like frost. Sophie smiled, her voice tight. "Mom, Clara's house is beautiful. It's full of memories." Diane's gaze flicked to her daughter. "Memories don't pay for repairs, darling." Then, with a delicate tilt of her head, she turned back to me. "But I'm sure you've thought about all that." I met her eyes and said quietly, "Every single day." For a moment she looked surprised, as if she'd expected me to crumble. But I didn't. I just sat there, steady, letting her words wash over me and fade. The meal dragged on. Diane talked about investments, art galleries, and their little place near the coast. Robert chimed in with muted agreement, his eyes half on his phone. Ethan barely spoke, his fork moving in slow, nervous motions. Sophie smiled through every pause, filling silences with polite laughter that never reached her eyes. When the plates were cleared, Diane dabbed her mouth and stood. "Lovely meal, dear," she said to Sophie, then turned to me. "And you must tell me where you found that cardigan. I haven't seen that color in years." "Probably because they stopped making it," I said softly. She froze for a heartbeat, then laughed. Brittle, controlled. "Ah, vintage," she replied, her voice sweet as glass. Later, while everyone lingered over coffee, I stepped out to the balcony. The city shimmered below, endless and indifferent. Behind the glass, I could see their reflections. Diane sitting upright, Sophie leaning in close, Ethan slouched in silence. I told myself I'd just breathe for a while, let the cold air settle me. But when I turned to go back inside, I stopped. The voices carried through the half-closed door. "Sophie," Diane said, her tone low, firm, "don't be naive. That woman has nothing left but that house. You need to think long-term. You and Ethan are young. You can't keep waiting around." "Mom, please." Sophie's voice trembled, but Diane cut her off. "Don't be foolish. Sentiment doesn't build a future. When people like her go, they don't take anything with them. Be smart." My fingers tightened around the door frame. The cold air suddenly felt heavy. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Inside, Robert mumbled something about real estate prices. Sophie sighed. "I'll handle it," she whispered. Diane's voice softened. "Good girl." I closed my eyes. The city lights flickered against the glass, reflecting my own face. Still, expressionless, but the eyes were burning. The camera lingers on Clara's reflection in the glass. A quiet, steady gaze that says it all. She's heard every word. The house had gone quiet after dinner. Outside, rain brushed against the windows, thin and steady. I was standing by the curtains, folding the scarf around my shoulders, when I heard voices from the living room. At first, I thought it was the TV. Then I heard my name. I froze. The curtain was half drawn. Through the gap, I could see Sophie sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand. Diane was beside her, legs crossed, voice low but sharp, the kind of tone that cuts without needing volume. "She only gets what? $2,800 a month? That barely covers groceries. And when she gets sick, who will pay the hospital bills? You will, Sophie. You need to be realistic." Sophie sighed. "Mom, please not tonight." "I'm not saying this to be cruel." Diane continued swirling her wine. I'm saying it because you have to think ahead. She's old and you're young. That house is her only real asset. If she transfers it to you now, it saves a lot of trouble later, while she's still clear-headed. Sophie didn't answer, she just stared into her glass. All it takes is one signature, Diane said softly, almost smiling. One piece of paper, and you never have to worry again. A laugh, quiet, dry, slipped from Diane's lips. It echoed in the cold apartment like metal scraping against glass. Behind the curtain, I stood motionless, every muscle locked. My hands clutched the edge of my scarf until my knuckles turned white. $2,800. She even knew the number. My life, my years of working, of saving, all reduced to a figure discussed over wine. My chest tightened, the air in my lungs thick. My eyes stung, but I didn't blink. Through the dim light, I saw Sophie lean her head on her hand. It just feels wrong, she murmured. She's my husband's mother. Then treat her kindly, Diane replied smoothly. Let her think it's her idea. Tell her it's just for convenience. People like her, they don't need much. Just the feeling of being useful. The words sliced through me. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my ears. Every sound in that room, the rustle of the curtain, the clink of glasses, the laughter that followed, turned heavy, cruel. I thought about every meal I had cooked for them, every gift I had packed, every smile I forced. And now, I realized, all of it had been weighed, measured, and priced. I turned away, afraid the sound of my breathing would give me away. My reflection flashed in the glass, pale, still, almost ghost-like. I walked quietly to the guest room. The rain had picked up, beating against the windows in short, hard bursts. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the packed suitcase in the corner. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. For a long while, I couldn't move. I listened to the faint hum of their laughter from the living room. It blended with the rain, distant and hollow. When I finally stood up, something inside me had gone still. I folded my scarf, the same one Harold had bought me the winter before he died. The wool was soft, worn smooth at the edges. I wrapped it tightly around my neck. I looked around the room one last time. The tidy bed, the folded towels, the untouched glass of water. Everything in its place, everything temporary. Then I picked up my suitcase. As I opened the door, the laughter grew louder for a moment. I glanced back. Through the narrow gap, I could see them. Diane leaning close, Sophie nodding faintly, their faces lit by the golden glow of the lamp. They looked warm, comfortable, untouched. I stepped into the hallway. The apartment lights were dim, the air cold. My shoes clicked softly against the floor. Each sound felt heavier than the last. At the door, I hesitated. My fingers brushed against the doorknob, slick with rain from earlier. For a moment, I almost turned back. Not because I wanted to stay, but because I knew leaving meant accepting the truth. The truth that I was alone, that the people I thought were my family saw me only as a problem to be solved. The elevator was silent. The mirror inside showed a woman I barely recognized. Wet hair, tired eyes, lips pressed tight to keep from trembling. When the doors opened, the cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. I stepped out into the night. Rain poured down the empty street, washing the city in silver. I didn't have an umbrella. The wind pushed against me as I walked, the suitcase bumping along the wet pavement, its wheels squealing faintly. The lights of passing cars flickered across the puddles, casting long, broken reflections that looked like faces. Strangers watching me go. My coat clung to my skin. My hands were shaking from the cold, but I didn't stop. For every step I took, I felt something loosen. The weight of disappointment, of pretending, of holding on to people who had already let go of me. I walked without knowing where I was going. The city blurred into a mix of rain, neon, and memory. Somewhere behind me in that warm apartment, Sophie was probably laughing again. Diane was pouring another glass of wine, and Ethan, maybe he was still pretending not to notice the space between us. By the time I reached the corner, I couldn't tell if the wetness on my face was rain or tears. The night was cold, but it didn't hurt anymore. The hurt had turned into something quieter, something like clarity. At a red light, I stopped. My suitcase leaned against my leg. I looked up at the sky, gray, heavy, endless, and whispered, half to myself, half to Harold somewhere beyond the clouds. I don't know if I'm running away or finally finding my way home. The signal turned green. I crossed the street, the rain swallowing my footsteps. I didn't know if I was leaving or if I was finally coming home. Seattle greeted me with rain, not the cruel kind that lashes your skin, but the quiet kind that seeps into the bones. The taxi left me by the gate, the driver's headlights cutting through the mist before fading away. I stood there for a while, suitcase in hand, staring at my own front door. The key was cold between my fingers. When the lock finally turned, a breath of stale air rushed out to meet me. Damp, familiar, heavy with the scent of dust and pine. The house was exactly as I'd left it. The half-closed curtains, the folded blanket on the couch, the piano sitting in the corner like a sleeping animal. I set my suitcase down and walked to it. My hand hovered over the keys. They were cool to the touch, rough with dust. When I pressed one, the sound cracked. Sharp, off-tune, a little broken. I pressed another. Same thing. It was ugly, but it was honest. I sat down. My fingers moved slowly at first, stiff from months of not playing. The melody came out uneven, like an old woman trying to remember how to walk. But after a few notes, something inside me began to thaw. I started playing the old piece Harold used to love, the one he'd hum absent-mindedly while fixing the kitchen shelf. The sound filled the room, clumsy and imperfect, yet alive. Halfway through, I missed a note. The mistake echoed loud and wrong, and I froze. And then it hit me. All those years I had kept the music inside. When Harold was alive, I played only what he liked. When Ethan was little, I played for him. Then, when he left, I stopped altogether. Music had always belonged to someone else. Never to me. The thought cracked something open. My hands began to shake. Tears came before I could stop them. They fell onto the keys, leaving small dark spots that blurred in the dim light. I didn't even bother to wipe them away. I let them fall. I kept playing. The melody stumbled, fell apart, came back again, not as a song, but as a release, a confession. For the first time in years, I didn't play to impress, or to comfort, or to fill the silence. I played because the silence had become too loud. When the last note faded, I stayed there staring at the piano. My breath came slow, heavy. The rain outside had turned into a soft drizzle, the kind that barely touched the ground before disappearing. I looked around the room, the peeling wallpaper, the faint stains on the ceiling, the empty teacup by the window. It was all so small, so ordinary. But it was mine. I walked to the kitchen and brewed tea, the simple act grounding me. The sound of the kettle boiling blended with the faint hum of the city outside. Later that night, I found my old laptop in the drawer. I sat at the kitchen table searching online for something. I wasn't sure what. Somehow, I ended up on the community college website. A class caught my eye, Music for Healing, Adults and Seniors. The description was short. Learn how music helps us process emotion, grief, and change. No experience required, I smiled. No experience required, I whispered. Perfect. The next morning, I walked through the rain to the bus stop. The city looked different, not warmer, not friendlier, but clearer. I noticed the way the light hit the puddles, the sound of footsteps blending with the hum of engines. It all felt alive. At the college, the classroom smelled faintly of old books and disinfectant. A group of older women and a few men sat in a circle, holding notebooks. A young instructor smiled as I entered. "Welcome," she said. "You must be Clara." I nodded. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like someone's guest or someone's burden. I felt like a person arriving somewhere she was supposed to be. We spent the next hour talking about sound, how certain notes mirror the rhythm of a heartbeat, how silence is also part of the music. When the instructor asked us to play a single note that felt like home, I sat quietly for a moment. Then I pressed the middle C. The sound was simple, pure, neither happy nor sad, just steady. It lingered in the air, blending with the hum of the heater and the faint rustle of papers. That one note filled something inside me I didn't know was empty. When the class ended, I stepped outside. The sky had cleared. A cold breeze brushed against my face, carrying the scent of wet earth. I stood there, eyes closed, listening to the city breathe. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to notice me. I was simply here. I walked home slowly, humming a tune I didn't recognize, one that was still finding its way. Back inside, I sat by the piano again. The keys were still uneven, but I didn't mind. I pressed the same note I had played at school, middle C. It rang through the house, soft and steady. Outside, the wind joined in, whistling faintly through the cracks in the window. When I pressed that final note, the sound blended with the wind, quiet, imperfect, but new. Maybe that's what healing sounds like. The classroom smelled faintly of disinfectant and old sheet music. Morning light slanted through the blinds, laying soft golden stripes across the piano keys. I was early again. Old habits die hard. I liked those few minutes before class started, when everything was quiet and the world still felt half asleep. I was tracing the rim of my teacup when she arrived. A woman about my age, maybe a few years older. She carried a small bouquet of lilies wrapped in newspaper. The scent filled the room before she even spoke. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked, her voice gentle but steady. "Please," I said, moving my bag aside. She smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Ruth Park," she introduced herself. "I'm new. First day nerves." "Clara Voss," I replied. "You're not the only one." When the class began, the instructor asked us to pair up and improvise something simple. One person playing, the other humming a tune that matched. Ruth's hands moved over the keyboard with a kind of quiet confidence. She wasn't perfect, but she wasn't afraid either. Her humming was soft, like a lullaby. When the exercise ended, she turned to me and said, "Music's funny, isn't it? You don't play what you want to say, you play what you can't." That was how our friendship began. Not with big promises, just shared silences and understanding looks. After class, we walked to a nearby cafe. She set the bouquet on the table, and the scent of lilies mingled with the smell of coffee. I asked her if she brought flowers everywhere she went. She laughed. "I own a flower shop," she said, "right across from the library. Keeps me busy. My husband used to say I could talk to plants better than to people." I smiled. "And now?" "Now," she said softly, "the plants are better company." There was no sadness in her tone, just truth. We began to meet every week after class. Some days we practiced together at her shop, the sound of the piano blending with the faint rustle of petals. The lilies were always there, freshly cut, their scent clinging to everything. One morning, I found her trimming the stems carefully, humming a hymn I didn't recognize. "Why lilies?" I asked. "You always have them." She paused, the scissors mid-air. "Lilies only stay beautiful if you cut off the dying parts," she said. Then she looked at me. "People are the same, Clara. We have to let go of what's rotting, even if it once made us happy." Something about the way she said it stayed with me. We started talking about creating something together, a space for people like us, who had lost too much and spoken too little. Ruth said she'd been thinking of offering free flower arranging sessions for widows and retirees. I mentioned my music classes. By the time the tea went cold, we had a plan. We called it Healing Through Music. Ruth handled the space, small room at the back of her shop, where the walls smelled of earth and rain. I brought my old keyboard and a few notebooks. The first class had only 4 people. One woman cried when she played her first note. Another sat in silence for 10 minutes before whispering, "I'd forgotten what sound feels like." We didn't need a syllabus. We just listened. Soon, word spread. People brought friends. Someone from the community center stopped by to ask if we could host sessions twice a week. By spring, the local newspaper sent a young reporter to do a feature. He was nervous, barely out of college, and his camera kept fogging up from the humidity in the room. "So, what made you start this?" he asked, fumbling with his notes. Ruth smiled. "Loss," she said simply, "and the need to fill the silence that comes after." When the article was published the following week, the headline read, "Two widows turn music into medicine for the lonely." They used a photo of us standing in front of the shop, Ruth holding her lilies, me with my hands resting on the piano keys. Behind us, the sign read, "Harmony Blooms." I bought 3 copies of the paper and left one on my table next to Harold's photo. For once, the house didn't feel so empty. That night, as I made tea, I thought of all the women who'd come to our class, their tired faces lighting up when they heard their own music. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And maybe that was enough. Somewhere in another city, I imagined Sophie pouring herself a glass of wine, scrolling through her phone, pretending not to care about the world outside her circle. I wondered if she would see the article. A week later, I got my answer. Ethan called briefly, polite, distant. He mentioned that Sophie had come across something online. His voice trailed off, unsure of what to say next. "She must be proud of you, Mom," he added weakly. "I didn't ask. I didn't need to." Later that night, as I sat by the window, I imagined Sophie's perfectly manicured fingers scrolling past the article, her expression calm, unreadable, until that small flicker, that flash in her eyes. Jealousy isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet pause before pretending you don't care. Sophie's finger hesitated above the screen, her smile frozen. Then she scrolled past, but her eyes, just for a second, burned. The phone rang on a quiet Sunday morning. I was polishing the piano keys when I saw the name flash on the screen. Sophie. For a moment, I didn't move. The last time I'd heard her voice was through Ethan months ago, distant and polite. I almost let it ring out. But something inside me whispered, "Face it." I picked up. "Mom," she said, her voice bright, almost too bright. "I saw the article about your music classes. I'm really proud of you." The words sounded smooth, practiced, like a line rehearsed too many times. "Thank you," I said softly. There was a pause. I could hear her exhale, slow and deliberate. Then, "I was thinking maybe I could come visit. It's been too long. Just a weekend. What do you say?" The silence stretched between us. I imagined her twisting a strand of hair, waiting for me to make it easy. "Of course," I said finally. "You're always welcome." When the call ended, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the rain slide down the glass. Somewhere inside, a quiet voice reminded me, the kindest smiles often hide the sharpest teeth. She arrived 2 days later in a tailored beige coat and polished boots, carrying a basket of pastries from some downtown bakery. The lilies on my table were fresh that morning. Ruth had brought them earlier, joking that my house finally smelled like spring. Sophie stepped inside and looked around. "You've really fixed the place up," she said, running her fingers along the piano's edge. "It feels lighter." "It's just cleaner," I said, pouring tea into her cup. She smiled. "Still, it's beautiful. You always had good taste, Mom." I nodded, letting the silence settle. She talked about San Francisco, Ethan's new job, her new clients, the restaurant they'd discovered by the bay. Her words flowed easily, practiced like small talk at a corporate dinner, but her eyes wandered. Every few moments they flicked toward the bookshelf, the desk, the small filing cabinet near the corner. She was smiling, but her gaze was measuring, scanning. "Music for healing," she said suddenly, glancing at the newspaper clipping framed on the wall. "That's really something, Mom. You've become quite the celebrity." I chuckled. "Hardly, just keeping busy." She leaned back in her chair, fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "Ethan showed me the article. He was impressed too. Said he hasn't seen you this happy in years." "I am," I said simply. Her eyes softened, but only for a moment. "You deserve it. After everything you've been through." Then, as if remembering something casual, she added, "By the way, Mom, have you, started thinking about your will yet?" The question came so smoothly it almost sounded like concern. I didn't flinch. I poured more tea, steam curling between us. "Almost," I said calmly. "I've been meaning to. Caroline Reed, my lawyer, she's been helping me with the paperwork." Sophie froze for a second, just long enough to betray surprise. "Caroline Reed?" "Yes," I said, taking a sip. "She's very thorough. Kind woman. Used to handle estate planning for the local community fund." Sophie nodded, masking her expression too late. The corner of her mouth twitched just slightly. "That's good. It's smart to plan ahead." "I've learned," I said quietly, "that not planning ahead can be dangerous." Our eyes met across the table. Her smile stayed, but her pupils had tightened. 2 small, dark points. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Only the ticking of the wall clock filled the room. Then she stood up, brushing imaginary crumbs off her coat. "I should get going," she said lightly. "It's getting late." I walked her to the door. She turned once more, the smile still perfectly in place. "You really have changed, Mom. There's a different energy about you." "Maybe," I said. "It's just peace." She hesitated. "Peace looks good on you." I smiled. "You too, Sophie." She laughed, a soft melodic sound that didn't reach her eyes, and stepped out into the cold. The door closed with a quiet click. I stood there for a while, listening to her footsteps fade down the porch steps. Then, through the window, I saw her pause by the car. She pulled out her phone, her shoulders tense. The streetlight cast a shadow across her face, and for a second her expression changed, the mask slipping. The smile vanished, her jaw tightened. Her hand gripped the phone so hard her knuckles turned white. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw her lips move, fast, controlled, like someone already giving orders. When she finally got into the car, she sat still for a long time before driving off. I closed the curtains and exhaled slowly. The room felt smaller, but warmer somehow, as if it understood. People think betrayal happens once, a single event, a wound. But the truth is, it happens in waves. Each one quieter, more refined, more polite, until one day you stop reacting. You simply recognize it for what it is. As the car disappeared down the foggy street, the camera lingered on Sophie's hand gripping her phone. Veins taut, eyes dark, a smile long gone. The next week I found myself sitting across from Caroline Reed in her office, a clean, bright space overlooking Elliott Bay. The morning fog was still thick outside, the kind that blurred edges and made the city look softer than it really was. Caroline couldn't have been more than 35. Sharp navy suit, hair tied back, eyes clear and focused. She had the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly where every word she said would land. "Mrs. Voss," she began, folding her hands. "Your son's wife, Sophie, she's shown some interest in your estate?" I smiled faintly. "You could say that." Caroline nodded slowly. "I've seen this before. Families can be messy when assets get involved. You're wise to handle this now." I watched her, curious. "You sound like you've dealt with this more than once." She leaned back, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "More than I'd like to admit. Money doesn't change people, Mrs. Voss. It just shows them faster." The words lingered in the air. I felt them settle somewhere deep inside me. "I don't want revenge," I said softly, "but I don't want to be naive again either." Caroline tilted her head. "Then don't be. Protect yourself quietly. Let them believe what they want to believe." She opened a folder, flipping through the pages. "We can create a layered document, something that looks like a full will but isn't finalized. You'll maintain control, but it'll keep the curious ones guessing." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean a decoy?" Caroline smiled, a sharp, deliberate curve of the lips. "Let's call it strategic ambiguity." We talked for nearly 2 hours about trusts, transfer clauses, and contingency plans. But underneath all the legal talk, there was something else, an understanding between two women who had both learned how to navigate a world that rarely played fair. As we stood to leave, she looked at me and said, "Mrs. Voss, sometimes silence is the most legal weapon of all." I smiled. "And the most painful." That afternoon, Sophie dropped by unannounced. She carried a bag of croissants and that same practiced smile. "I was just in the area," she said. "Thought I'd stop in." "Perfect timing," I replied, gesturing toward the table. I was about to make tea. We sat by the window. The light was soft, the air calm. Outside, gulls wheeled above the bay. Everything felt deceptively peaceful. Sophie chatted about Ethan's new business trip, about the weather in California, about how quiet my life must be here. I let her talk. I nodded in all the right places. And then, as she reached for her cup, I stood and picked up the phone on the side table. I dialed deliberately, not too fast, not too slow. When the other line clicked, I raised my voice just enough to carry across the room. "Caroline, hi. Yes, it's Clara." I paused, glancing briefly at Sophie. She was pretending not to listen, but her shoulders stiffened. "About the paperwork we discussed," I continued. "Yes, I'd like you to go ahead and prepare the transfer documents for the house." Sophie's cup froze midair. I walked slowly toward the piano, keeping my tone even. "Yes, that's right. Transfer of ownership to the Silver Harmony Fund. All proceeds to support senior artists." "Exactly. Let's make sure it's official this month." The sound of glass shattering split the air. Sophie's hand had slipped. The cup hit the floor, water and porcelain scattering across the tiles. "Oh my! I'm so sorry, Mom," she gasped, kneeling to gather the pieces. "It's fine," I said gently, handing her a napkin. "Accidents happen." She looked up, flustered. Her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. "You're donating the house?" I gave a small shrug. "Why not? It's just bricks and walls. The fund could use it more than I can." For a second, her mask faltered completely. Shock, anger, disbelief, all flickered across her face before she forced them back down. "That's very generous of you," she said finally. "Maybe," I replied, sitting down again. "But generosity feels lighter than regret." We finished our tea in silence. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock and the distant call of seagulls outside. When Sophie finally stood to leave, she hesitated by the door. You've really thought this through, haven't you? I have, I said, smiling faintly, with help from people who think clearly. She nodded too quickly. Of course. Well, I should go. Tell Caroline I said hello, will you? I will, I lied. The moment the door closed, the house fell silent again. The shards of glass still glittered faintly on the floor where the sunlight hit them. I didn't clean them up right away. I just sat there, listening to the faint hum of the world outside. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small or cornered. I felt calm, the calm that comes from knowing exactly what game you're playing, and that the other player doesn't realize the board has already changed. Later that night, I called Caroline. She bought it, I said. Caroline chuckled. Of course she did. People like that always do. They can't resist believing the world revolves around their benefit. She'll come back harder, I warned. That's fine, Caroline replied. You're not hiding anymore. You're controlling the story. I looked around the quiet house, the piano, the lilies, the cooling pot of tea. You're right, I said. For once, I'm the one writing the ending. A few days later, as I was watering the plants by the window, I noticed Sophie's car parked across the street. She didn't get out, just sat there, phone in hand, watching. The sunlight hit the glass just right, revealing her reflection. Tense, motionless, eyes dark. I turned away, pretending not to see her. The kettle whistled softly behind me, a clean, rising note. I poured the tea, lifted the cup to my lips, and smiled. Because I finally understood, not all music needs to be heard. Some melodies are played in silence, and silence can be louder than any scream. The camera lingers on Clara's face as light cuts across her eyes. A faint smile, the whisper of piano keys. Then darkness, and the line appears on screen. Even silence has a sound. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Seattle winters had a way of swallowing time, gray mornings blending into darker afternoons until you couldn't tell one from the other. I sat by the piano, notebook open, the first few lines scribbled across the page. Last winter in San Francisco. The title came to me like a whisper, uninvited but inevitable. The melody began simple, fragile. A single note, then another. The sound of rain tapping against the window pane slipped naturally into rhythm, as if the sky itself was keeping time. For weeks I had been writing in silence. No words, no confrontation, no explanations. But now, sitting before the piano, I realized this was how I would finally speak. Each note carried a memory, a night, a word, a wound. The softness of Ethan's childhood laughter, the sharp edges of Sophie's smile, the echo of Diane's voice, that metallic tone that sliced through politeness. And layered beneath it all, the recording. I had saved it months ago, the one from Chicago, the one I'd never intended to use. Until now. With careful hands, I placed the small recorder beside the piano. The green light blinked on. I pressed play. She only gets $2,800 a month. When she gets sick, who's going to take care of her? Get her to sign the house now while she's still clear-headed. Their voices, Sophie's and Diane's, spilled into the room, faint but clear. The piano answered them. Soft chords, low, patient, not angry, just honest. I played through the ache, weaving their words into melody, letting the contrast speak louder than any accusation could. The warmth of the piano against the cold cruelty of their voices, the harmony of betrayal and peace. By the time the recording stopped, the piece had taken shape, quiet, haunting, complete. It wasn't vengeance, it was release. The next morning, I took the recording, polished, titled, and exported, and sent it to the local radio station. The email was short. A song for all the mothers who were forgotten too soon. CV. No signature, no explanation, just the file. I didn't expect a reply, but 2 days later I got one. Dear Ms. Voss, your composition moved our entire team. We'd like to feature it on our Sunday segment, Echoes of Home. That Sunday, the city was wrapped in drizzle again. I turned on the small radio in the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, and waited. At precisely 7 p.m., the host's voice came through. Tonight, a special submission by a local composer. This piece is titled Last Winter in San Francisco. Dedicated, in her words, to the mothers who loved in silence and were forgotten. Then, the first note. The piano filled the air, soft, melancholic. The rain outside kept rhythm. And then, faintly, like ghosts from another life, The whispers began to surface beneath the melody. She's old, Mom. What happens when she can't take care of herself? You need to get the house in your name. The words blended into the harmony, almost beautiful in their cruelty. Across the state, in a warm, candlelit apartment in San Francisco, Sophie was setting the table for dinner when the radio on the counter caught her attention. Last winter in San Francisco? She froze. The first few bars played, she recognized the tone instantly. Clara's piano, her mother-in-law's piano, and then the voices. Her own, unmistakable, intertwined with her mother's. She'll be a burden. Better to plan ahead. Her hands trembled. The knife slipped, clattering against the plate. Mom, are you hearing this? Robert asked from the dining room. But Sophie didn't answer. Her face had gone pale, her breathing shallow. The whispers grew louder, echoing beneath the melody like ghosts refusing to be buried. She grabbed the radio, twisting the dial, but the music didn't stop. The station host's voice followed, steady and solemn. Sometimes music tells truths we can't speak. This, dear listeners, was Last Winter in San Francisco by local pianist and teacher, Mrs. Clara Voss. The sound hit Sophie like a wave. Her knees buckled. The radio slipped from her hands. The earbuds that had been hanging around her neck fell to the floor, the plastic cracking as they hit the tile. Silence. Only her breath, ragged, uneven, filled the room. Her reflection in the darkened window stared back at her, unfamiliar, guilty, cornered. In Seattle, I sat quietly by the window, watching the rain. The radio had gone silent now, replaced by the soft hum of evening. I didn't smile, I didn't cry, I just listened to the sound of peace slowly returning. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel small. I just felt heard. The invitation was simple, handwritten, sealed in an ivory envelope. Dinner, Friday, 7 p.m., Napa Valley. Clara. No explanations, no apologies. When the evening came, the valley was wrapped in gold. The vineyard stretched endlessly under the fading sun, rows of grapes glowing like embers. The restaurant stood at the edge of the hill, elegant, quiet, every candlelight flickering against the glass. I arrived first. The maitre d' led me to a long oak table set for 4, polished silver, burgundy napkins, a bottle of Cabernet breathing beside a small vase of white lilies. It looked perfect, almost too perfect. Ethan came in first, looking uncertain but hopeful. Then Sophie, her smile carefully rehearsed, and finally Diane, her perfume preceding her like a flag of conquest. Mother, Sophie said warmly, this is beautiful. It's generous of you. I smiled. It's just dinner. The waiter poured the wine. The glasses caught the light, red swirling like slow fire. We talked, or rather they did. Diane praised the wine list, Sophie asked about my classes, Ethan avoided everyone's eyes. The conversation fluttered above the table like tissue paper, delicate, meaningless, ready to tear at the slightest pull. When the main course arrived, I placed my napkin down. There's something I'd like to share, I said quietly. Sophie's smile stiffened. Of course, Mom. I reached into my purse and set a small speaker on the table. Black, unassuming. I pressed play. At first, only soft piano filled the room, the opening notes of Last Winter in San Francisco. The melody was gentle, familiar, sad. Ethan smiled faintly, relieved. This is beautiful, Mom. But then the second layer began. The recording. She only gets $2,800 a month. If she gets sick, who will pay? You need the house. Diane froze, her fork halfway to her lips. The sound of her own voice, casual and cruel, drifted through the candlelight. Sophie's color drained. Mom, what is this? I didn't answer. The piano kept playing, calm and unwavering, wrapping around the words like silk over steel. She's still lucid. Just get her to sign. It'll be easier later. Ethan's head turned sharply toward his wife. Sophie? She tried to speak. I was just... Diane slammed her napkin down. Turn that off. But the song didn't stop. It played through, unhurried, like justice that no longer needed to shout. The waiter froze in the doorway, sensing something sacred or dangerous in the air. The last notes faded. The room was silent except for the hum of the heater and the trembling of Sophie's breath. I lifted my glass, took a slow sip, and looked at each of them in turn. Ethan's face was pale, his eyes wide with something between disbelief and grief. Diane sat rigid, knuckles white, her lips pressed thin. Sophie stared down at her. Plate, tears glinting at the edge of her lashes. "Why?" Ethan whispered finally. I set my glass down gently. "Because truth deserves to be heard, even when it's ugly." Sophie opened her mouth, but no sound came. Diane's voice broke the silence, trembling but defiant. You set us up." I smiled faintly. "No, I just pressed record." The candles flickered as a draft passed through the room. Somewhere, a waiter dropped a tray in the distance, the crash echoing faintly, like a punctuation mark. I leaned back, folding my hands calmly on the table. "You know," I said softly, "for years I thought I had nothing left to give. But then you gave me something. Something I didn't expect." They looked up, confused. "Inspiration," I said. "Pain has a melody. You just have to be brave enough to play it." I lifted my glass again, the wine catching the light. "So, thank you. Because of you, I wrote the best piece of my life." The next morning, the valley was quiet. The fog that had rolled in overnight began to lift, revealing rows of vines glistening with dew. Inside the small conference room of the inn, sunlight streamed through the glass walls, cutting soft lines across the table where we sat. Ethan, Sophie, Diane, Robert, all were there. Caroline Reed sat beside me, her briefcase neatly closed, her posture calm and unshakable. I looked at them, the people who had once been my family in ways both real and broken. No anger, no bitterness, just distance, finally honest. "Before we begin," Caroline said, her tone measured, "Mrs. Voss has something she'd like to share." I nodded, then stood, my hands resting lightly on the table. "I asked you all here," I began, "not for explanations or apologies. Those belong to the past. I asked you here so there would be no more pretending." Diane crossed her arms. "If this is about that little performance last night—" I turned to her gently. "No, Diane. That was music. This is truth." A silence fell over the room. Only the faint hum of the heater filled the space. I unfolded a single page from the folder in front of me. My voice was steady, but my heart beat slow and certain, like the rhythm of an old familiar song. "This," I said, "is my official will. The real one." Sophie's eyes widened slightly. Ethan leaned forward. Diane's lips parted in disbelief. "The house in Seattle," I continued, "will be turned into the Silver Harmony Community Music Center, a place for seniors to learn, play, and remember what it feels like to be heard." Caroline slid copies of the document across the table. The letterhead gleamed in the morning light. "Silver Harmony Foundation, transfer of estate. My pension and savings," I added, "will fund free classes for low-income retirees. And the music program Ruth and I started, it will continue under her care." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan's voice cracked softly. "Mom? You're giving it all away?" I smiled. "I'm not giving it away, Ethan. I'm giving it purpose." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. Sophie sat perfectly still, her face pale, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. Diane, on the other hand, let out a bitter laugh. "So, this is how it ends?" she said. "A charity?" I turned to her, unflinching. "It's how it begins." She pushed back her chair and stood abruptly. "You're unbelievable." "Maybe," I said quietly, "but at least I'm free." She gathered her bag and stormed out, heels striking the marble floor like a gavel. Robert hesitated, then looked at me. And for the first time, his voice was soft. "Mrs. Voss," he said, "you are the strongest woman I've ever met." I nodded in gratitude. "Strength isn't what survives storms, Robert. It's what grows after them." He gave a small, solemn nod, then followed his wife out the door. The room fell still. Ethan was the only one left standing beside me. His voice was barely a whisper. "Mom." I turned to him. His eyes, the same blue as his father's, were filled with regret. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking, "for not seeing, for not defending you." I reached out, touched his hand lightly. "Ethan," I said softly, "you don't have to say it. You just have to understand." He nodded, tears finally falling. "I do." "Then that's enough." For a while, we just stood there, mother and son, quiet in the golden morning light. No need for forgiveness because the silence had already said it all. Caroline closed the folder, smiling faintly. "It's done," she said. "Silver Harmony is officially yours, Mrs. Voss." I looked out the window, the sun rising over the vineyards, the fog dissolving into air. "No," I said gently. "It's theirs now." That afternoon, I walked alone through the vineyard trail. The air was crisp, filled with the faint sweetness of grapes and earth. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played, last winter in San Francisco. For the first time, I listened without sadness. The music didn't belong to pain anymore. It belonged to peace. The hall wasn't large, just the community center Ruth and I had pieced together from leftover grants and secondhand chairs. But that evening, when the lights dimmed, it felt like a cathedral. The banners read, "Silver Harmony, Winter Recital." Outside, the city was wrapped in quiet fog, soft and white. Inside, the room glowed amber. Strings of fairy lights reflected on old instruments polished for the first time in years. Elderly men and women filled the seats, whispering, laughing softly. Some clutched sheet music, others just waited, eyes bright with nervous pride. I stood by the piano, my fingers grazing the smooth wood. Ruth was beside me, arranging a vase of lilies on the stage. She looked at me and smiled. "Smells like home," she whispered. I nodded. "It does." In the third row, I spotted Ethan. He sat quietly, hands folded, eyes soft. No longer the hurried son from before, just a man finally seeing his mother as she was. When the lights dimmed further, I took my seat at the piano. The chatter faded into silence. For a brief moment, all I could hear was the faint hum of the heater and the sound of my own breath. Then I played. "Last Winter in San Francisco." But this time it was different. No recordings, no hidden voices. Just music, clean, forgiving, alive. The melody unfolded gently, like light filtering through morning curtains. The same notes that once carried bitterness now felt lighter, fuller. Where there used to be pain, there was something like gratitude. Every chord landed not as a wound, but as a breath, the sound of letting go. Halfway through, I glanced up. Ethan's head was bowed, his shoulders trembling. Ruth stood by the door, her hands clasped in front of her heart. The final note rang clear, floating through the hall, merging with the faint echo of the old wooden floor. When it faded, the room was silent. Not out of confusion, but reverence. No one clapped. No one needed to. It was the kind of silence that doesn't follow music. It becomes music. I exhaled, my fingers resting still on the keys. The world around me softened, the lights, the faces, the air. It all felt weightless. Ruth walked up to the piano, her steps slow and sure. She placed a hand gently on my shoulder. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Kauja ta tu roi a?" I turned to her. The stage light caught her eyes, warm and glistening. I smiled. "Kong kan, min chi tu du thoi." She squeezed my hand, a small gesture but full of years of understanding. Behind us, the audience remained quiet, some with tears they didn't bother hiding. Outside, the fog had lifted just enough for the moon to shine through, faint but certain. I looked up at the pale light seeping through the window and thought, maybe forgiveness isn't a gift you give to others. Maybe it's what happens when you finally stop holding the knife by the blade. Later, when everyone had gone home, I stayed, behind to turn off the lights. The hall was dark except for the piano lamp glowing over the keys. I pressed one note, middle C, the same one I'd played that night in Seattle. The sound was soft, steady, enough to fill the room and fade into quiet. I smiled. It was enough. The morning we left, the sky was clear, the kind of blue that only appears after rain. Ruth was already outside, her scarf fluttering in the breeze, loading the last suitcase into the back of her old silver Subaru. "Got everything?" she asked, smiling. I looked at the house, the Silver Harmony sign glinting in the sunlight, and nodded. "Everything that matters." We didn't say goodbye. Some places don't need goodbyes. They stay with you no matter where you go. The road stretched ahead, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, miles of open sky and winding asphalt. We rolled the windows down, letting the cold morning air rush in. The radio played softly, some forgotten jazz tune that matched the rhythm of the tires against the road. At first, we didn't talk, just drove. The sound of wind, the hum of the engine, the occasional bird cutting through the sky. Freedom doesn't need to announce itself. It just arrives, quietly, and sits beside you. By noon, the light turned golden, spilling through the windshield. The mountains rose in the distance, vast, patient, eternal. Ruth hummed along with the music, her fingers tapping the dashboard in time. Then she turned to me, her eyes glinting with mischief. "Clara," she said, "do you realize what we're doing?" "What's that?" "Running away without permission." I laughed. "Maybe we're not running away, Ruth. Maybe we're finally heading somewhere." She nodded, eyes on the horizon. "Either way, no one gets to tell us where to stop." The car filled with laughter, the kind that comes from deep inside, the kind you forget how to make until one day it just finds you again. The highway curved along the coast, waves crashing below like an applause meant only for us. "Tell me," Ruth said suddenly, "do you miss them? The ones who hurt you?" I thought for a moment. The road stretched endlessly forward, shimmering in the afternoon sun. "No," I said softly. "Not anymore. You can't miss what you've already forgiven." Ruth smiled, her voice barely above the hum of the wind. "Tajao kan I cho fep jejuosh tudo, clarani?" I turned toward her, the sunlight painting her hair silver. "Kong, Ruth," I said, smiling. "Tachikan timin go jung hip." The music rose, a soft swell of strings and piano blending with the roar of the wind. We drove on, past empty gas stations, endless fields, and skies so wide they felt like forgiveness itself. At one point, Ruth leaned her head back and whispered, "You think the world still has a song left for us?" I looked at the road ahead, endless, bright, waiting. "It always does," I said. "We just have to keep playing." For most of my life, I thought happiness came from other people, from being needed, from being useful, from hearing someone say, "Mom, I couldn't do this without you." I thought love meant giving until there was nothing left. But now I know happiness doesn't arrive when someone gives it to you. It blooms the moment you dare to live in rhythm with your own heart, even if no one else can hear the music. The camera rises above the open highway. The sky burns orange and violet, the sun slipping low behind the mountains. Ruth's old silver Subaru hums steadily along the empty road. Through the windshield, light spills across their faces. Two women with silver hair, eyes fixed on the horizon, smiling at nothing and everything. Wind rushes through the half-open window, carrying the faint melody of a piano, silver harmony, the sound of freedom. The notes blend with the engine, with the hum of the tires, until everything becomes one continuous sound, a song without words, without applause. The drone camera climbs higher. The car becomes a glimmer of light moving through the vast expanse of goldfields. The world seems endless, but for once, Clara isn't afraid of it. "You don't need permission to be free," her voice continues softly. "You just have to stop asking for it." A quiet laugh, Ruth's, a pause, the sound of the piano fading into the wind. "I used to believe I needed an audience," Clara whispers. "But now I understand. If your heart still knows how to sing, that's enough." The screen brightens with the final stroke of sunlight spilling across the road. The music swells gently, strings and piano intertwining, the same melody that once carried sorrow, now reborn in peace. As the car disappears into the horizon, a single line fades in, white against gold.